All right, we are here with George Hamilton, the star of La Cage aux Folles, which is...
He once dated Elizabeth Taylor, slept in the White House, and made millions. Now, George Hamilton can barely afford his medical bills. At 85, the screen legend just got devastating news. The cancer has returned, his fortune is gone, and the mansion he lived in for decades must be sold. From dating the president's daughter to fighting for survival, this is the tragic end nobody saw coming. George Hamilton was born in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1939. His father was a famous band leader from the North, and his mother was a Southern belle from Arkansas. It was a mix of big city flair and Southern charm that would later shape George's whole image. As a child, he moved around constantly because of his father's music career. This early travel gave him a taste for glamour, but also made him adaptable. He wasn't the oldest or the youngest, just the middle kid in a complicated family. Everything changed in 1944. George's father cheated with a singer from his band, and the marriage ended badly. His mother was left to raise the kids on her own during wartime. George was only 5. The breakup wasn't just emotional, it would ripple through his entire life. His father, after leaving the family, moved to New York and quit music to sell perfume. He died young in 1957. George's childhood quickly turned from flashy hotels and music to survival. After the divorce, George and his brothers moved to Blytheville, Arkansas, to live with their grandparents. For a short while, life was peaceful. He finally had a home that felt safe. He bonded with his grandparents and got a dose of that polite Southern upbringing that would stay with him forever. But in 1947, both grandparents died. Just like that, the last bit of stability vanished. His mother was left with no money, no support, and 3 boys to care for. She was desperate and out of options. So she flipped a coin. Heads, they'd move to New York. Tails, they'd try their luck in Hollywood. It landed on Hollywood. That single coin toss changed everything. They packed up and left for California. George was just 8, but Hollywood already felt like a calling. Still, the path wasn't smooth. They moved again by 1950, this time to the East Coast. George bounced between schools until he landed at Gulf Coast Military Academy in Mississippi. That military school shaped him. It taught him discipline, posture, charm, all the things he'd be known for later. He stood out there, not just for his manners, but for his poise. But behind the polished surface, his private life was still dark. He was still dealing with the twisted relationship with his stepmother, which had started before he even hit his teens. It was a secret he kept for decades. In 1958, at 19, everything turned. George landed a screen test with MGM. He didn't have formal training, just a high school acting award and raw charisma. He was broke, barely scraping by, but somehow got an agent who believed in his looks. MGM gave him a shot. He got $500 and a role in Crime and Punishment, USA. It wasn't much, and the directors didn't even want him. They preferred Anthony Perkins. But they were stuck with George, and he surprised everyone. He gave a performance so intense that it stunned critics. He played a law student who kills a pawnbroker and gets haunted by guilt. Somehow, George made the character both cold and vulnerable. That role won him the Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. He even got a BAFTA nomination. And yet, Hollywood still didn't take him seriously. He had to bribe someone with a bottle of Jack Daniels just to get a TV appearance. That's how unpredictable the business was. One day, you're the next big thing. Next, you're begging for work. Around this time, he made another bold move. He started tanning. Deep, rich, and permanent. It wasn't vanity, it was branding. George wanted to stand out in a town full of handsome men. The tan made him instantly recognizable, and soon it became his trademark. He and actor John Derek even had a playful rivalry over who could get darker. George turned his skin tone into part of his identity. He'd joke about it, own it, and use it to stay relevant even when his acting roles dried up. Then came Where the Boys Are in 1960. George played a smooth, rich college boy. The film was a hit. It was clean-cut, romantic, and perfectly timed for a changing America. While the original book had political themes, the movie left all that out. George thought it was a light, silly film, but audiences loved it. He even improvised one of its most iconic scenes, writing a question mark in the sand next to his co-star. That little moment sealed his heartthrob status. The film quietly reflected big cultural changes, showing how sex and romance were shifting in American life. Even decades later, academics pointed to George's role as part of a broader conversation about gender, courtship, and pop culture. In 1965, his performance as Hank Williams caught the attention of the most powerful family in America, the Johnsons. That's how he found himself at a White House dinner, where he met Lyndon B. Johnson, the president's daughter. She was bookish, quiet, and presidential royalty. He was bold, smooth, and from Hollywood. But somehow, they clicked. George later said he could tell there was a wild side hidden under her calm look. Their romance quickly became the talk of the country. They showed up at red carpets, took trips to Acapulco, celebrated Easter at the LBJ Ranch, and even stole the spotlight at the Academy Awards. Bob Hope joked that she didn't need a watch because she already had a Hamilton. But not everyone was smiling behind the scenes. President Lyndon B. Johnson didn't like it at all. He didn't trust George. He wasn't just worried about a Hollywood actor dating his daughter. He was suspicious on a whole other level. So he did what no father should ever do. He ordered an FBI investigation. But this wasn't just background checking. This was personal. The president asked Supreme Court Justice Abe Fortas and FBI boss J. Edgar Hoover to dig deep into George's life. They wanted to know everything: his friends, his credit cards, his family, even rumors about his sexuality. George's brother was gay, and that alone made him fear the worst. In that era, just the whisper of being gay would ruin careers. The FBI kept digging. Nothing damaging came up, but they didn't stop. Then came the strangest moment of all, a surprise hunting trip at the president's ranch. George got a call from the White House. He was expected in Texas, no questions. When he landed, Johnson took him straight into the woods, handed him a gun, and gave him a stare that said this wasn't about deer. George had to think fast. He played along, fired the gun, and even impressed the president. Johnson finally cracked a smile and called him a regular Daniel, comparing him to frontiersman Daniel Boone. But George knew exactly what was going on. This wasn't hunting. It was a test of manhood, a test of loyalty, a test of control. Meanwhile, another storm was brewing: his draft status. George had avoided military service by claiming he supported his mother and brothers. But reporters and officials smelled a lie. After all, his mother lived like royalty in Beverly Hills. The president, already furious over Vietnam, saw this as unacceptable. If George was going to date his daughter, he couldn't also be dodging the draft. Johnson didn't say it outright, but the message was clear: either join the war or get out of my family. The pressure became too much. The romance ended in late 1966. But here's the twist: George didn't burn bridges. When Linda married Marine Captain Charles Robb in 1967, George showed up at the wedding with a smile, posing for photos like it was just another Hollywood premiere. He kept in touch with the couple over the years. Even when Robb became governor of Virginia, George was invited. He later admitted in his memoir that he looked at the ceremony and thought, "That could have been me." By 2012, long after the headlines faded, the Robbs went to see George perform on stage in Washington, D.C. They even had him over for dinner. Decades had passed, but the connection never fully disappeared. George Hamilton never became the president's son-in-law, but for a brief, surreal moment in the 1960s, he came closer than any Hollywood actor ever had. By the late 1970s, George's spotlight in Hollywood had dimmed. Then came a strange but brilliant twist. In 1979, he played Count Dracula in a comedy called Love at First Bite. No one expected much, but Hamilton didn't just act in it, he also helped produce it, and the film ended up being a surprise hit. Instead of playing it serious, he leaned into the absurd. His Dracula danced to disco and cracked jokes. People loved it. Suddenly, Hollywood saw him differently, not just as a handsome actor, but as someone with sharp comic timing and real business smarts. The movie made money, and it made Hamilton matter again. That same boldness showed up in his personal life, too. In 1972, Hamilton got married in a way that sounded like a scene from a movie. He was hanging out with Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's manager, when his girlfriend, Alana Collins, dropped by to pick up her things. She was about to fly back to England. Out of nowhere, Parker suggested they just get married that day. And they did, on Elvis's private jet, in Elvis's suite, with a judge waiting and a little dog standing in as the maid of honor. They even had time to hit the roulette table. Hamilton lost $15,000, but came home with a wife. Their love story had started years earlier in Acapulco, where they couldn't stand each other. But somewhere between a pinch, a slap, and a whirlwind romance, it turned into something more. 2 years later, their son Ashley was born. For someone known as a playboy, Hamilton took to fatherhood in a surprisingly grounded way. When filming Medusa in Greece, he turned the job into a family honeymoon. Ashley would later grow up and become an actor himself, appearing in films like Beethoven's Second and Iron Man 3. Even after George and Alana divorced, they kept raising him together. And George didn't stop at just being a good father to his own son. He also built close ties with Alana's kids from her later marriage to Rod Stewart. It was an unusual family, but somehow it worked. Most Hollywood divorces are cold or chaotic. Theirs wasn't. George and Alana split in 1975, but never really let go of each other. They stayed best friends. They talked every day. They had dinner together. Alana drove because George was always running late. They joked about getting remarried, but didn't need to. What they had was better than most marriages. George once admitted that after the divorce, he'd catch himself missing something, and then realize it was her. They had moved past being a couple into something deeper. Alana summed it up perfectly. I have his back, and I know he has mine. Then there was another storm for George Hamilton. It all started in 1979, when George Hamilton flew to the Philippines to promote his vampire comedy, Love at First Bite. At the time, it was the biggest moment of his career. What he didn't expect was an invitation to lunch at the presidential palace, where he would meet the country's first lady, Imelda Marcos. That single lunch turned into a globe-spanning friendship full of glamour, secrets, and eventually, scandal. Imelda was instantly charmed by Hamilton, and their bond grew quickly. They traveled the world together, shopped side by side, even sang songs in private. But what looked like a harmless celebrity friendship soon revealed something far darker. That same year, Hamilton also met two people from Imelda's tight inner circle. Antonio Floerendo, a wealthy businessman who made his fortune through deals with the Marcos regime, and Gletzi Tantuco, Imelda's closest friend and personal shopping agent. These weren't just background figures. They played key roles in what would become a trail of secret deals, shady loans, and millions of dollars that somehow ended up passing through Hamilton's hands. In 1982, Hamilton received a $600,000 loan from Floerendo. He said it was to refinance his Mississippi plantation, but the timing raised questions. It came just 2 months after he attended the flashy Manila Film Festival, where guests drank $100 French champagne and ate roasted cows. Later, investigators discovered something far more troubling. Roughly $12 million might have flowed through Hamilton's accounts. In one case, he even flew to Hong Kong to collect $5.5 million from Tantoco's bank account. Money prosecutors believed came straight from the Philippine Treasury. Soon after that, he started remodeling his Beverly Hills home, building a giant garage and expanding his living space. The money, they believed, helped pay for it. And it didn't stop there. Imelda's team even looked into buying the property next door, supposedly to expand Hamilton's estate. Some thought the house was never really his to begin with, that it was a Marcos property hidden in his name. But the wildest twist came with a failed movie project. Hamilton planned to make a film about General Douglas MacArthur. At first, it was meant to be an action-packed war story, but under pressure from Imelda's circle, the script changed into something completely different. A romantic drama about MacArthur's unrequited love for a Filipina woman. According to Hamilton, it was deeply embarrassing. He said the line, "I shall return," was turned into a love message, not a war declaration. In the end, the movie never got made, and the $5.5 million was quietly returned to a Hong Kong bank. Prosecutors later claimed the whole thing was just a front, a money laundering scheme to move stolen funds around the globe. By 1988, Hamilton's name showed up in a federal indictment. He wasn't charged, but he was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in a case against Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos. It was a major blow to his image. While defending himself in the press, Hamilton insisted he was nothing more than a friend. He said he never did business with Imelda and only attended her film festival out of courtesy. But the facts told a messier story. He admitted receiving millions, he testified in court, and he continued to defend the Marcoses even after they were accused of stealing more than $100 million from the people of the Philippines. His legal team tried to paint him as innocent. They called him a Southern gentleman who wouldn't even talk business with Imelda. They said he didn't know where the money was coming from and returned everything once he realized something was wrong. But behind the scenes, the story didn't line up. Floarendo, the man who gave Hamilton the loan, later admitted that Imelda had pulled all the strings. She decided where the money went, who controlled it, and how it was used. Even Hamilton's house, according to some, might have been part of her hidden empire. In court, Hamilton said he may have been used, but never knowingly. He said he didn't see the red flags. And though he avoided formal charges, the damage was done. His friendship with Imelda had dragged him into one of the most notorious corruption scandals of the 20th century. Millions had vanished, reputations were ruined, and a forgotten war movie may have helped cover it all up. In the mid-1980s, something strange happened on the set of a movie called Poker Alice. George was starring alongside Elizabeth Taylor. Yes, the Elizabeth Taylor. And their chemistry wasn't just for the cameras. It spilled over into real life. The two dated for about a year, and even after they broke up, they stayed close. But the real shock came later. Elizabeth sent George a breakup gift, an actual solid gold ace of hearts from Cartier. On the back it said, "Dearest George, I love you even though you are an asshole." George found it hilarious. To him, it wasn't just a gag. It was a strange but sweet way of saying, "We're always connected." That was Elizabeth. Fierce, funny, unforgettable. George never forgot her. But Taylor wasn't the only beauty in George's life. During a reality show appearance in 2009, George casually dropped a bombshell. He had dated at least 4 Miss World winners. He didn't name names, but the message was clear. The man had a type, and that type was global royalty in high heels. Back in the 60s and 70s, George was everywhere. Red carpets, film sets, magazine covers, and always with a different beauty on his arm. Even Burt Reynolds once joked about it, giving him a birthday card with a photo mashup of Tony Curtis and Anthony Perkins labeled, "To George, love from Mum and Dad." George thought it was hilarious. He showed it to everyone. In 1995, George's love life took a serious turn when he met Kimberly Blackford, a swimsuit model who was just 20 years old. George was 56. Hollywood shrugged. That's just George. But this wasn't just another fling. They stayed together for 4 years and had a son named George Thomas Hamilton, GT for short. George didn't marry Kimberly, but he stayed in his son's life. GT was raised with old-school discipline. George sent him to a military academy, just like he had done with his older son, Ashley. The age gap between father and son was huge, 60 years, but they bonded in a way that surprised everyone. GT turned out calm, ambitious, and well-mannered. George saw it as a second chance to get fatherhood right. Even his ex-wife, Alana Stewart, remained close. After they divorced, she married Rod Stewart and had 2 more kids, Kimberly and Sean. Most people would walk away at that point. Not George. He stepped in as a kind of second father to Rod's kids. And somehow, it worked. The whole blended family even starred in a reality show in 2015 called Stewarts and Hamiltons. It was weird, funny, and shockingly functional. George and Alana still talk almost every day. They visit, have dinner, and joke like old friends. Alana even does the driving because George is always late. After all the marriages and divorces, they landed on something that looked a lot like family. But George's life wasn't all flash and fun. As a child, he got measles and lost hearing in his left ear. He hid it well. Most people had no idea. Doctors later told him it was permanent nerve damage. That was supposed to be it. But then Gloria Swanson, an old friend, stepped in and said, "Go to Switzerland." There, George tried an experimental treatment involving stem cells, long before stem cells were a thing. It was painful, expensive, and totally off the grid. But it worked. Slowly, his hearing came back. Within a month, he regained 95% of what he'd lost. George said the clinic was full of celebrities, no names mentioned, sneaking in quietly, hoping for their own miracle. It was like a secret society of the rich and famous, chasing one last fix. Years later, in 2025, George faced another major scare. His heart valve was failing. At 86, most people would prepare for the worst. Not George. He underwent open-heart surgery, and within 2 days, he walked out of the hospital. His doctors couldn't believe it. Within weeks, he was back to walking, lifting light weights, and doing stretches. His heart rate dropped to athlete levels. George credited it all to his diet, a daily shake packed with kale, almonds, bananas, and whatever other green superfoods he could find. His recovery was so impressive that his doctors started documenting it for other patients. George did something nobody expected. He launched a skincare line. Yes, the man known for sunbathing like it was a full-time job was suddenly selling creams that promised to undo sun damage. It was called the George Hamilton Skincare System, and it promised miracles overnight. One product even claimed to reverse years of skin abuse while you slept. That claim made dermatologists roll their eyes, but it didn't stop people from buying. In the first year alone, the line brought in over $4 million. George turned shopping malls into red carpets, charming women with champagne and beauty tips. But like most trends, the glow faded. New celebrities jumped into the skincare game, and by 1993, George's products quietly disappeared from the shelves. But he wasn't done selling the sun. Around the same time, he opened a chain of tanning salons, right when doctors were yelling from rooftops about how tanning could cause cancer. George disagreed. He said his beds were safer and gave people a little joy and color. Experts called that dangerous nonsense. Even so, his salons grew fast, raking in millions across California, Florida, and Arizona. That run didn't last either. In 1992, customers started suing after developing skin cancer. George settled, but the damage was done. Then came the worst twist of all. He had to get cancerous cells removed from his own skin in 2011. Just like that, the tanning empire faded away. Years later, when people thought he'd vanished from the spotlight, George pulled off a genius comeback. In 2016, he became KFC's Extra Crispy Colonel. At 77, while other actors were begging for roles, he landed a multi-million-dollar ad campaign by doing what he did best, embracing his tan and laughing at himself. He made jokes about sun damage while dressed as Colonel Sanders, and it worked. The ads went viral, sales jumped, and George was suddenly relevant again. It wasn't just a paycheck, it was a masterclass in self-marketing. That comeback didn't stop with commercials. In 2009, he joined the British reality show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and charmed a new audience by surviving the jungle. He didn't win, but he didn't need to. He left with millions of new fans and more TV offers. In 2015, he even got his own reality show, Stewarts and Hamiltons, giving cameras a peek into his unusual blended family. The show didn't last long, but it served its purpose. It introduced his teenage son GT to the public, and reminded everyone that George Hamilton was still a brand worth watching. In early 2025, he made headlines again, not for acting, but for packing up and moving back to Palm Beach. At 85, most people assumed it was for the weather or nostalgia. But the truth was darker. Over 4 years, he had lost $12 million to a crooked business manager who tricked him into fake real estate deals. By moving to Florida, George could protect what was left thanks to the state's generous asset laws. And just like that, he turned a near bankruptcy into another smart pivot. He rejoined the local social scene, cracked jokes about running for mayor, and proved once again that he could survive almost anything. George has also taken aging into his own hands. At nearly 86, he doesn't talk about slowing down. He talks about turning 100 like it's just another chapter. Every day starts at 5:30 a.m. with meditation and a swim. He eats like he's still in the Mediterranean, credits his energy to curiosity, and works on new film projects. Health scares didn't stop him, they just pushed him harder. His story isn't just about reinvention, it's about family too. George has 2 sons, but he admits he raised them differently. His first son, Ashley, was born during George's peak fame years. George was barely around. With his younger son, GT, born when he was 60, things changed. He slowed down, showed up, and made fatherhood a priority. The two traveled the world together, built trust, and even teamed up for a reality show. He says GT gave him a second chance, not just at parenting, but at life. Politics has always followed him too. Back in the 60s, he dated President Johnson's daughter, giving him access to the White House. Over the years, he rubbed shoulders with both sides of the aisle, always keeping it classy and neutral. Now his son, GT, is getting into politics himself, pushing for change and carrying the Hamilton name into the next generation.